Welcome to the Individuated Bookshelf, a Sophia Cycles podcast for readers who know that the right book at the right moment can change a life. I'm your host, Bea Gonzalez. Through Jungian psychology, mythology, philosophy, and the Western esoteric traditions, I explore the texts and ideas that shape the inner world. This is a space for those who read, not just for information, but for transformation.
Hi, Bea. Morning.
I am so glad you were able to join me after I suggested we speak about something that is really central to the whole Jungian idea, and that's the concept of individuation, which, because it has the word individual somewhere encoded in there, people often interpret to mean some sort of narcissistic, egoistic trip where you become the best dog in the show, and it's actually quite the opposite in some ways. So I thought we'd bring in our mutual friend, James Hollis, into describing what it's about, because I think he does a particularly good job. So I'll just take one of his many quotes that he says on the subject. So he says in his book, Hauntings, individuation is profoundly humbling. It obliges us to stand naked before the gift of life, the summons to personhood, and accede to the demand that we show up and contribute our small part to the big picture. From afar, that sounds reasonable, even doable, but in practice, we're all intimidated by what it asks of us. Our well-being once depended on our fitting in, being adaptable, agreeable, accommodating. Individuation asks that we actually have a separate summons to be different. And so let's take it off from that idea of the separate summons to be different, because I think most people will feel very uncomfortable with that thought, because being different, if you were as a child, often made you the subject of bullying, for example, or feeling ostracized from your group. And so that feels like a pretty heavy lift. What is your take on this?
That's interesting. I haven't heard that particular, or I haven't come across that particular definition. Different. Tell me, Bea, if different in relation to the cultural, religious, family expectations of an individual, that they're from a very early age, we are surrounded by sometimes subtle, sometimes quite overt expectations around who we are. And those can be obviously related to your family, to the culture, the background of your family, to the culture, the overall culture that you're living in, where you're living, any religious affiliations your family or that culture has. So when we talk about difference, are we talking about the ability to say, hold on, I have a feeling that I'm not aligned, or I don't fully agree with, or don't fully buy into, let's just say, for example, these beliefs and these ideas that my parents seem to be so passionate about, or that my priest or my minister seem to be talking about every Sunday. I feel somewhere inside of me that I am different. Is that where we're talking in terms of difference?
Yeah, totally, absolutely. So let's bring in the word differentiation into the whole conversation. So the idea is that you think of it as you're a big particle that has been created by exactly what you talked about. Your parents, maybe your religious affiliations, definitely your peer group. That's going to be part of it, and society itself, right? And so differentiation means you are taking and becoming the particle you are. You're taking it away from that mass, and you're saying, yes, I am this, but I'm not quite entirely that. And you're taking pieces of yourself slowly back so that you become fully what we would call integrated and become fully who you are. And there's a risk to that because, like we say, you risk ostracizing or becoming ostracized from your group. But exactly what you said, all those things, parents, even partners, they could have an idea of who you are. You're even in work situations. You have to follow certain, I can think of artists know this, that you have to do certain types of work or else you're not going to be accepted. And so it's the idea to be courageous to say, I am not that. So yes, the process is exactly as what I'm describing and what you've said. So the way you start, at least in the Jungian model, is you start through what we call shadow work. So you start taking those parts of yourself that you might have projected onto others in order to fit in. And by the way, that isn't only dark material. The rejected parts, like your anger and your ability to set a boundary because you're so scared of alienating people. It's actually also, and this is really important, parts of yourself that you've given away, like your creativity. I can't write a poem. I'll let the experts write the poem. I can't act. I'll let the actors act. It can be so many parts of yourself that you were afraid to live because you didn't think that you could own those powers. I've known situations where people have in their family, they'll have the artist in the family, and they think, oh, that family member, that sibling took that role. I can't be that anymore. So yes, all of that. So you start with the shadow material. And that can be painful in itself because it also does mean owning parts of yourself that aren't really all that likable, right? So yeah.
Let's talk about two specific examples, and I'm going to cite some of the information that you were talking about in your last recording when you were speaking on your own about your time in London, King's College, and then I will speak about my own sort of experience with a certain part of this. If you don't mind me asking you, that obviously was a pivotal moment in your life and a very important moment. I understand from what I heard from you in your last recording that a lot of that was about this individuation, about this sort of understanding that there's one force pulling you one way, but then there is another thing saying, hold on, wait, maybe that's not the way. So could you just be really specific in terms of how that particular experience, and I realize you went through some of this last week, but just as a reminder, what that was that led to this individuation feeling or sense?
Okay, that's a really good question because I didn't go into it as deeply because it's such a long story. But I think my need to be an academic was a compensation. I was sent to Spain when I was in my teenage years. I did high school in Spain and I had to live with a grandmother who had positioned me. She didn't quite like me, and that's fine. You know how you can have a family member that is supposed to like you, but doesn't quite. So we graded on each other. And she positioned me as a pretty but dumb girl. Okay. So I was told, and I've had to face this like later because I had to figure out what was driving me so much that I needed to get a credential, to get the PhD, to be able to prove I'm not dumb. And I realized it actually had its origins in being singled out in that fashion. Now you would think, look, I'm intelligent. I know that was a grandmother. She was crabby. She was difficult. But I think the psyche doesn't understand those things because it encodes things emotionally. And so emotionally, there must have been a part of me that felt that, yes, this resonates somehow, that I'm actually not very smart. So then and I'm very, let's put it out there, I love ideas. I'm surrounded, as you can see by books. I've always been interested in ideas. So her assessment of me didn't even reflect who I felt myself to be in some ways. But yes, there was a driving force for me to prove this. I also had a very intelligent older sister who scored excellently on every exam, whatever. So you always have things you're looking to. And so I think part of that was the need to prove that, yes, I'm not who my grandmother said. And maybe there were other factors, but that was definitely part of it. I also have to say that I love learning. So you put me in an academic environment and it's not hard for me to say, hey, I can stay studying history and literature for the rest of my life. And I've continued to. I just haven't done it in that setting. But the need for that credential is what was keeping me from really pursuing other parts of my life that I felt. So that's what I've tracked in my own life to be. And that moment in London when things were not working out, it was almost like life saying, okay, you have to make a decision here. You can't hang on to this. And so, yeah, but it came at a very dark time. They often do. I don't know what your experience of this. Yeah.
So when you left that, when you chose to leave the college and leave London and come home, did you feel like you were disappointing someone, maybe not your grandmother, but your parents, your friends, excuse me, somebody's idea about that you needed to complete this master's degree or PhD?
Yeah, at that point it was a PhD. So I think
PhD, yeah.
I had created a persona where, hey, I'm off to England. I got accepted to these institutions. The PhD was the Wellcome Institute associated with London, Oxford, Cambridge. Woo. It was all a way for me to bolster that part of myself and to tell my peer group, especially. I luckily did not have that kind of pressure from my parents because I don't think they even knew what I was up to in that regard. We're part of the Gen X latchkey kids. Fundamentally, our parents didn't even know they never knew what we were doing. So it was like, oh, she's in England. That's interesting. So that wasn't a pressure, thank God. But I would say that definitely the thing that I had built up around me going to England at the time, that was more difficult than it is today. I think no social media, nothing. You're basically isolated. So yeah, it was a bit of a facepalm in some ways. On the other hand, yeah, it was painful to continue in that kind of trajectory. So yes, so there was that disappointment. And to myself, no, because you know how and maybe you can talk to this about your own life, you know how you know that something doesn't really fit, no matter how much you try to fit yourself into that world. You're trying, you're doing all the right moves, and then a part of you is really in the background saying, this isn't that this isn't working. And so once I accepted that it didn't work, then it became very easy. But I have to say, and I think I mentioned it in that last episode, it still took me to a dark place for a while. I don't generally suffer from any kind of depression or anything, but it was hard. The first couple of months as I readjusted were really hard. Yeah.
I will talk about something very personal that obviously you are aware of, being a friend of mine, but about my sexual orientation, my sexuality, and the discovery, which of course is so much a part of individuation for an individual. Many people that feel the way that I felt as a young person don't act on it, put it away, repress it, do some actions that they feel conform to what their parents, their religion, their friends, their society believes. So at a very early age, I felt different. At a very early age, I was obviously privileged in that I was the boy in the family. I was spoiled, so my family provided for us very well. But as I reached into early adolescence, I felt different about something that was happening inside of me. And what was important was I wasn't seeing any affirmations, any images, any ideas, any examples around me that what I was feeling, in that I had this attraction to men, that I had any way to realize this without being a freak,
Yeah.
without being an exile, shut out. And that was, particularly as I got 13, 14, 15, that was really scary. It was really scary when you do not see anything affirming what you are feeling. This is why I feel so strongly about where we are in a lot of ways in the LGBTQ plus community now, in terms of young people being able to see, oh yeah, there are all sorts of options, and there are all sorts of, and it's all good and it's all beautiful and all that. I'm very pleased about that. But for me as a young person, I was scared. And by the time I was 16, I was pretty sure that it was just going to be something that I was going to have to hide and not act out on, because I didn't want to be rejected. I didn't want to be exiled. So I will say I was very lucky in that I did not have parents that talked about their disdain or distaste for the LGBTQ community. So I didn't grow up in a house full of bigotry or that kind of, but I also did not see anywhere where I could get support. So it took me quite a while. It took me well into my 20s, say 26, 25, 26, before I finally felt perhaps you know what? I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
I got to a point where I can't live like this.
Yeah.
I can't live not being able to express what I feel. And of course, by that point, I was starting to see men in secret. And of course, and I just didn't know how to I didn't want to do that anymore. By the time I reached 25, I was like, this is impossible. I can't live this life in secret. I can't do it. And again, that dark night of the soul where I'm like, no, I'm not living the rest of my life like this. I'm not doing it.
No.
And that is when I started to come out. First to friends, of course, who were accepting, and then to my parents and my family. And it was scary. And I wasn't completely certain how it was going to go, but it was a transformational time in my life. I feel very strongly that aligns with this idea of individuation, because of course, and I have all the more sympathy and empathy for people that choose to not integrate that part of their life, right? That say, no, I don't want the hassle. I don't want the disdain. I want to be able to conform. I was very lucky because at a certain point I went, I can't conform.
Yeah, that unlived life that you were speaking about, the idea that you repress something that is so fundamental to what makes us human, is so tragic. in so many ways. And yeah, I have great compassion for people who do not feel safe, because there is a safety thing involved here, right? I still remember, Jeff, your mother writing, and was it your mother who wrote a letter in defense of during the gay pride parade into, was it? And I thought, the way to go. I thought, this is why my friend Jeff is able to feel support. And that's so important. That is so important. One of the reasons we need so many different types of representation, not just of sexuality, but of ethnicity, there's so many things, is because you want people feeling that there is a community and a model that allows you to believe this can be done. Whether it's a person that comes from a very impoverished background thinking, yeah, I can still get to be a lawyer, let's say, which, by the way, in Canada, we take for granted. This is something that Canada allows. I was born outside of this country, and I never felt I didn't have all the opportunities that were available to every Canadian. And that really, I think we don't understand how incredible that is. This country really distinguishes itself that way. And I'm always thankful my parents and Canada chose to allow them to come in, because it's a two-way street. So yes, that is exactly what you're talking about, that you have the safety and not everybody does. But I think with Hollis and Jung, what they point to is that the courage is important. We have to build the courage, because if we don't, then we'll have not lived out the life that was intended for us. It's almost like you live a very small life because fear has kept you in. So a lot of what you're working with is to combat that fear. And so, yeah.
Doesn't Hollis say over and over again in literature, and he may be citing another author, but we all walk around in shoes too small for us.
Small for us. That's exactly it. That's one of his many lines, and he says it often, because it is hard. Again, it is hard to take on that bigger vision. And by the way, in a larger sense, in the Jungian world, what they talk about is you're having a relationship with something larger than you, which he called the self with a capital S. And you're integrating parts of the unconscious that are scary and show up in dreams and show up in maybe in your creative work. And you're saying, this is part of me. I can live with it. And this isn't done overnight. It's a lifelong project, and you never really reach the end. So anybody who says I'm fully individuated is not seeing the world properly, right?
I was just referencing yesterday a definition on Wikipedia, that highly esteemed font of information. But talking about individuation and talking about Carl Jung, and individuation, saying it involves integrating your conscious and unconscious mind. Yeah. What I sort of question there is, how can we ever, because it is unconscious, how can we ever really know that we have fully incorporated? I guess we never fully incorporate the unconscious with conscious, but we do have an idea that we maybe have reached another level of integration, that something feels right about these choices that I'm making didn't feel right 3 weeks ago or 2 months ago or a year ago. And perhaps that is the unconscious coming in going, yeah, you know what? There is integration here. There is an alignment here that wasn't here a year ago.
If you heed the voice. So one of the reasons you work with your dream material is that the dream is the unconscious speaking to you, symbolically, by the way. So it cannot speak directly, say, hey, Jeff, you need to be true about your life. It's speaking symbolically. It takes some work to do it. But what's really interesting, it will reveal to you just where you're stuck and where maybe a part of you is trying to intervene and say, hey, this isn't the whole story. And if you're getting repeated nightmares, that's a great example of looking into what you're fearing, right? And so to work with them, I have found over many years of working not only with my own dreams, but with the dreams of my group, it is a really powerful process, but never easy. And you almost have to take it as they're different facets of your life. So one of the primary ones we should all address is the parental piece, right? What part of me has been living the life my parents wanted for me? That's a huge one for so many people, right? Because so many people are living lives that they never chose, but their parents unconsciously drove the narrative that way.
And because there is a natural instinct in a lot of people to please your parents. Not everybody. I understand that there are people who are estranged from their parents and stuff. Yeah. But for a lot of people, as they grow into young adulthood, there is a natural inclination to want to please these people, who some of us feel did a lot for us when we were younger to support us. So now we want to return the favor by doing something that will please them. Oh, I graduated from law school. That's going to please my mom and dad. They're going to think, oh, she's going to be set now for the rest of life. I can see the path, right? That's that thing, as opposed to I didn't have this, but I know many of my peers. oh, mom and dad, I'm going to theater school. You're,
What?
no, you're not going. No, we're not wasting money on a theater. What are you talking about? You're going to be poor for the rest of your life. That's a huge thing. I'm going to be an artist. I want to go study flamenco in
Yeah.
Spain.
Yes. No, I know. It's so interesting. One of the most frightening lines that Jung wrote, and Hollis repeats often because we often refer to Hollis, and that really scared me having children, was that the most dangerous thing to a child is the unlived life of the parent. It's hard as a parent. I can tell you that you are raising them in a specific environment. They can't really 100% get away from it. But what I always tell my kids personally is, if any time whatever you're doing makes you truly miserable, I don't care if you're a lawyer, I don't care if you're a prime minister, you need to walk away. And that is so important to me,
That's
because I
great
don't think
advice.
it's the only advice I will give, because I have seen so many people sacrificing their entire happiness, or happiness is a dumb word because you're not always going to be happy, but their essential self, shall we call it, to some dream that someone had. And a lot of it is based on fear. I'll tell you one story because you gave that example. I had a friend who said to me, "Oh, I can't afford for my kids to go to art school." And I went, you definitely can. He said, "No, you're not understanding me. I can't afford for them to have that kind of a future because it is so insecure." And the kids at the time were 7. And I thought, wow, that's a crazy idea. But that's the kind of fear that you're talking about. Because what the parent seeks is, I want to make sure the kid is fine, right? But being in any profession doesn't make you fine. Anyway, it's an interesting.
It is interesting. And also that word security, right? Security is such an important concept as we grow up. We need you to be secure, because the opposite of that, insecurity, is what we all are anyway. I mean,
Yes,
it's like
I
there's
know.
nothing, we'll never get away from it.
Oh,
Security is a part of who we. I don't want to meet the person who walks around going, I don't struggle with insecurity. Then you know what? I have
there's no
nothing to
life.
talk to
The
you about.
struggle is the life. Absolutely.
The struggle is the life.
Yeah, I always marry the work I've done on this psychoanalytical side with a lot of work I've done in meditation. And there's a great book by Pema Chodron called Comfortable with Uncertainty. And it's a fantastic reminder, a constant reminder that no matter how certain you think you are, no matter how secure you are, anything can change in a second, right? And so to me, the idea of security is insane, but I can understand. I too feel that same inclination. When you have children, you want to make sure they're safe. I understand it, and it's a constant battle, but I think that may be one of the most important ones in ourselves. And just to make sure, because I think when you long for certainty, you commit to very scary things sometimes just to get certainty back. And I think you can look at the political situation we find ourselves in right now worldwide and see that a lot of people are committing to what they think is certainty, what somebody offering certainty, because they're so afraid. It's very easy to prime people with fear. And so if you work on it yourself, I think you become a better citizen as well, because you can spot it. You can say, oh, okay, I know what's happening here. Someone's trying to convince me they need more budget for a police force because this is fear working on you. So yeah, I think that is a very important part of the work. Let's talk, Jeff, about maybe some great examples we can find in literature, because I think that's where you can see the journey of individuation in different ways, the failed individuations, the attempts. I'll start with one of the ones that has been most analyzed by Jungians, because it is archetypal. It is so big that you can see the archetypes working. And sometimes that's actually easier than in a kind of a more realistic encounter. So the one that Jungians never tire of analyzing is The Lord of the Rings, because it has all the elements of what an individuation journey should look like. And one of the ways you do when you're looking at it from this lens, and you can look at things from many different lenses. I'm not saying this is the only one, but I'm just going to say maybe you want to consider this one. From a Jungian perspective, and I want you to even think about your life in this way, because I think it's really interesting when I started looking at my life this way. Every character in that story is part of one person, one psyche, okay? And so it's like you think, oh, okay, I have a Frodo in me. I also have Sauron. I have all of these characters in me. They're not separate. And so if you look at the journey, you're looking at the journey of one psyche trying to get to a point where they become fully who they are. And if you look at Frodo, who is one of the main characters, although there's many, you can see that the resistance to leaving the Shire, and that's a great beginning point. When you wanted to assert your own life by asserting that your sexuality, you were leaving the Shire. You were saying, I'm leaving the confines of this very safe environment, and I'm taking a risk by going outside and beginning this journey. I don't know where it's going to end up. Maybe it's tragic, maybe, but I need to do it. So there's a resistance and then the call. You go out and you say, okay, I must do this. And in this case, of course, you have a high stakes thing. But if you take the high stakes that are in something like The Lord of the Rings, I would say that the high stakes involved in a person realizing that their sexual orientation is something that is that they're afraid of being public with it or living that life is just has the same high stakes. It's the same thing. This is a symbolic interpretation of a problem or a challenge that seems very difficult. As you go along in that story, parts of the same psyche are coming out to help or hinder, and ultimately there is a goal. And one of the interesting things about that story that makes it work so well on the archetypal level is Gollum. Gollum is a part of you too, the part you reject, that kind of the graspy, but also obsessed with something, right? It could be, I'm obsessed with my money, I'm obsessed with this person, I'm obsessed with whatever my addiction. You substitute it, the ring can be whatever your obsession happens to be at that time, and it's unhealthy because there's no balance. But you needed Gollum because at the end of the story, who actually returns the ring? It's Gollum, weirdly. And so I think that's a story that works so archetypally well, because you're seeing that it's a huge, long story and there's so many parts. But I've always thought, if you could see your life that way, like how many parts of you are working either, and here's another thing the Jungians will say, and I wonder what you might think about this, that it's in fact in every fairy tale. Marie-Louise Lanfranc, who is the most brilliant of all of them, did a lot of analyses of fairy tales cross-culturally and found kind of the same elements coming up. It's the wicked stepsister who's pushing you to grow. It's those parts of ourselves that are being completely difficult and harsh that actually are the drivers for our personal growth. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there, you're going to eat and drink and be merry, but nothing is going to, you're going to stay in the Shire, right? Because it's a fun world. And so you also have to accept that there is a driver in you that is sabotaging you. And this is what Hollis famously said is called fate. Sometimes you want something and fate intervenes and that person leaves you, or that career doesn't work out, or you're fired. And the first instinct is to say, what a tragedy. And you could look at it differently. Oh, this is actually the beginning of my individuating journey in this part of my life. I don't know what you think about all that, but
I agree. I apologize. I believe it or not, and I am about to get kicked off every podcast platform around the world. But I have not read nor seen the movies of Lord of the Rings. So unfortunately, it is at this point that I cease to. Now, back in the day, I would pretend, and I would
like, no, good for you. I'll pretend.
Make something up. But you actually, and did we read this in the first? One of our first recordings, but that Marilynne Robinson piece, which is just what you were talking about in terms of Marilynne Robinson is an American author who wrote a number of really fine novels. And she was giving an interview in the Paris Review about 15 years ago. It's a small thing, but it ties into what you just said. She says, the ancients are right. The dear old human experience is a singular, difficult, shadowed, brilliant experience that does not resolve into being comfortable in the world. The valley of the shadow is part of that, and you are depriving yourself if you do not experience what humankind has experienced, including doubt and sorrow. We experience pain and difficulty as failure instead of saying, I will pass through this. Everyone I have ever admired has passed through this. Music has come out of this. Literature has come out of it. We should think of our humanity as a privilege. Do you know what, Bea? I go back to that little piece of text at least once a week.
Yeah, that's great.
Every time I feel that I have hit that darkness, that sense of I've screwed up again, I've disappointed somebody again, that person is not pleased with me, I am not pleased with this person, I did not achieve what I thought I was going to achieve. That darkness, which can convince me, you know what, Jeff, you didn't make it. Yeah. It's things instead of, yeah, Jeff, you didn't make it, but then you did make it over here and you did do this and you did. It's called being a human being. Yeah. And I love that. I love that one sentence, which is, we should think of our humanity as a privilege. Yeah. Wow, I got to screw up. Yeah. Wow, I got to make a mess out of things. And what's really exciting is I got to actually try to climb out of it as well. Yeah. Going back to the Lord of the Rings and the things, the adventure of those characters in Lord of the Rings is a mirror of what we all experience in those dark times, those insurmountable challenges that we think we're not good enough. We're not good enough. right? But remember, music has come out of it.
Yes, that's
Literature
it.
has come
All
about,
come
plays out of it.
suffering.
There is
Yeah.
nothing human is alien to
Yes.
me.
Yes, exactly. And that is very difficult to accept because I think, especially North American mentality, it can be extremely oriented towards happiness. And in every world, there are difficulties, etc. It's interesting. This morning, someone posted a story of a man who looked to be about maybe 30, talking about what had happened to him. He was a very attractive man. He was talking about how all of his life he finished his degree way ahead of time because he was going to do everything at fast speed and get to the top and et cetera, be the shining boy that he was told he was. And then he sunk into a deep depression and ended up 6 months in a hospital. And he talked about how he got out and what the process was. And one of the things that struck me is he said, I realized that the only way I could heal was by being of service to others. That was important to him. And I think it's probably important to as a part of the whole journey. Personally, that's the way I think anyway. But what he said is I had to realize that I had to let my ego not dominate the whole conversation in the sense that I wasn't special. Somehow, by having been attractive, by having been the golden boy, he got to the point where he thought he had to keep on that roller coaster ride where you're constantly trying to prove something, right? And so you can be proving something that someone has imposed on you that is of a positive quality, just like I had to fight with a negative idea of who I was. Both are actually toxic. And I just thought there was so much. She said, now I take day by day. I understand that there's nothing to prove. I'm just taking life as it comes. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty young person to have already realized that. But he needed 6 months in a very depressive state to get there. And so, he also said, which I thought was really powerful, which is, I feel better than I was before because I'm no longer like before the depression, because I'm no longer striving in that same way. It doesn't mean I don't get depressed, doesn't mean I don't go to the dark place, but through that process. And that's, I think, where we've pathologized that. I've had conversations with my friend Suman Anand, who's a psychiatrist, about this. We've made everything a pathology instead of, and this is one way that the Jungians really differentiate themselves, which is that a depression is often a call to a larger life. And if you can sit and bear the tension, and I'm not talking about these really deep depressions that need help. We have to really be subtle about the way we speak. And in this world, nobody seems to be able to speak without getting into the black and white extremes of things. There are times when you need help and you get it. But he's talking about those depressions where we feel life has failed us and we go into that dark night. And the way through, because it's not out, is to be able to bear that tension and to say, okay, something is trying to be birthed in me that's unknown to me. And here's a quality that I think you have, Jeff. I think it defined a lot of my friends, which is probably why you're all in my friend group, is you have great curiosity. And I think maybe that's what has helped me through darker times, that I'm curious enough to think, what the hell is this? What's at the other end? What's happening here? And I think when you continually question what's going on, it actually is a way through. It has been my way through. I don't know how you see this, but for me, it definitely has helped.
Again, it goes back to this piece from Marilynne Robinson saying the experience of the human experience, which does not resolve into being comfortable in the world. That is the antithesis of what we were all brought up in North American culture to believe. I'm looking for comfort. I need to be comfortable. I need to feel content. I need to feel that sense of comfort. I just want to be comfortable. Like, what if, sorry,
It's not it.
you get moments of that. Gosh
Yeah.
knows, you're sitting by the lake in the Muskokas in your friend's cottage, and you're drinking your wine cooler and you're having a nice chat conversation, and you're like, wow, absolutely. But this is my opinion, and I believe it might be one of my favorite authors, Marilynne Robinson's. The general state for all of us is a certain discomfort.
Yeah.
A certain Sondheim in Into the Woods has that song. You and I saw Into the Woods together.
We saw Into the Woods together. It's hilarious.
I thought it a mediocre musical, but some of
Yes,
really brilliant stuff, because these characters who are all fairy tale characters, and we get to go deep into their lives beyond what was written down as the original fairy tales. And sure enough, one of the chief leitmotifs in that whole musical, that the characters, all of them, keep singing, even when they've reached they've gotten married, they got the cow, they got back the beans, that they always end with, I've got this, but you know what? Hold on.
There's more.
there's something else I want, or
Yeah.
it's not quite exactly what I want.
Remember?
It is like, why are we never just, no, I'm completely good? Because it's not who we are.
No.
It's not humanity.
No, and I will say that Eros drive, which is desire, actually does produce most of our great works as well. There has to be a level of grading. Something has to be better to in you that pushes you towards that. So the part that's pushing you towards something that you conceive of, you don't even know what it is sometimes, actually can produce depending on your state of awareness. And this is where, again, it gets very tricky, because what are you being driven by? Are you being driven by the ego's need to assert itself as some special character always? Are you being driven by something that really feels like I feel I don't write many novels because I feel like I need to have something that is pushing me there to understand a part of myself that I didn't understand before. Not quite that interested even in anything else but the process, right? And so that is different, I think, from what drove me in my early days writing novels, which is I need to get published, I need to be seen, I need to be that totally different orientation today. Today, honestly, I'm very calm about the whole thing. It's like, oh, this is interesting. What's coming up in my mind that's showing up in my dreams, etc. But yeah, it's the levels of dissatisfaction. Weirdly, and this is like why you always have to look at the good and bad. That's what's pushed us forward too, in some ways, and sometimes pushed us back, right? Because it depends where you're being driven by. I wish people were being driven more by the need to understand themselves, just to be curious. Why do I think this way? Why is this so important to me? This is a
I
question.
wish people were driven. I wish people were driven to be challenged more, to be challenged our assumptions about ourselves and about the world, right? That to be curious, like that word that you used, to be curious and learn more than just. This is why it was so transformational when you introduced me 20 years ago to James Hollis. I didn't, and I read 6 books of his in the space of 3 years, but he didn't solve anything.
No.
Nothing.
No.
But he posed some questions, a lot of questions that made me really go, oh, there's more to discover here. And I have a feeling that this process will last the rest of my life, and I will never get there, like we cited earlier on, that complete and total integration of the conscious and the unconscious. But oh my gosh, this is exciting. That's what I felt when I first read Hollis.
Yeah, that is exactly what he takes.
Was excitement. Excitement, not because it was telling me, see, Jeff, you're wonderful, don't worry about it, everything you do is wonderful. It says, you know what it said to me? You got a lot of work to do, Jeff.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly what it says. And by the way, if you can look at the work, I remember a person I worked with used to say work is worship. And I look at work in that sense, self on the self, and understanding those parts of ourselves that are speaking sometimes louder than other parts and that you may want to be speaking to, but you are working towards not ever getting to any end goal, but just to be able to integrate. And that is an exciting process if you're open to it, and also messy and sometimes painful. Let's be honest about it. But do you remember when James Hollis, I invited him to Toronto? You were part of that day-long seminar that I organized. And afterwards, he used to be an English lit professor before he was an analyst, before he had his own dark night and went to Zurich. And so what he does, as you remember, is he asks a lot of questions. And I remember somebody who was there were probably about 30 people, one of them saying, well, I was expecting some answers. And I was expecting him. And I said, no, you've missed the whole point of his approach, which is he's asking you to ask these questions of yourself, because these are the questions that have helped him understand, and his analysis understand themselves. Nobody has an answer for you. And he has I just quoted this yesterday on Instagram, one of my favorite quotes from Tracking the Gods, which is also one of my favorite books of his, where basically he says that there is no guru that has come to save you. There is no ideology. There is no president or, hey, anything out there.
Or actor or celebrity.
There's celebrity, nothing. That's
author.
Saving you. No, you're on your own. But that is so exciting, because you on your own, and this is where I love this approach, you are the individual particle that has never existed. So we need you to do the work so we understand who you are through your own understanding. And that is the essence of all of this. It's if you do not do the work, the tapestry that is the whole world that made up by all these parts, are deprived of your own journey. And that is why we make it, not only for ourselves, but for families, but for the whole thing, right? And that gives you a sense of purpose, right? That there is something at work here that benefits the whole by working through yourself. And that is not egotistical. That is, again, very humbling at times.
Yeah, I agree completely. Completely. I will say, as a matter of personal disclosure, about the time that you introduced me to Hollis, and I started to get really excited about this literature and about what he was talking about as it related to challenging me, was also about the time that I discovered drugs and alcohol. And of course, I have a history with drugs and alcohol and a history in recovery and 12-step programs. And I will tell you that, in case anybody believes somehow that I read these Hollis books and my life took off and I gained this higher consciousness and have been living this incredibly elevated life, it wasn't the case. In fact, it was happening at a time that I was experiencing midlife and a lot of the issues that Hollis talks about. And then I discovered drugs and I went, oh, I can obliterate all of this. I can completely check out into this state of inertia, stagnancy, stasis, where I don't have to think about anything. I am going to narcotize these challenges that are coming at me in my midlife. I was reaching a point where I had come out of a long-term relationship that I thought was going to last forever. Again, those assumptions we have when we're young. I had reached midway in my career and it wasn't taking off. I wasn't working all the time as an actor. I was working office jobs that I was doing 15 years before. It was a time of, this is why it was mind-blowing when you introduced me to this stuff. But at the same time, I also took this path where, okay, you know what? Check out, Jeff. Just check out. Check out. Just, no, this is too uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I had a history with using substances that allowed me to escape.
Yeah.
And all the time that I was escaped, you're going to be shocked to hear there was no growth in my soul.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. You came out of that dark night, and this is the thing that, and there's something in you was driving you towards getting out of that situation somehow, right? And it's interesting. People think about drugs and alcohol. There's many ways to dope yourself up, right? People are doing it all the time. Even with strange ideologies, you can go out there and decide. I think the one that most people have judgment around might be that way, but there's so many ways the society provides to keep you in that soporific state where you don't have to look at yourself. There are many ways, and I would invite people to think that you've given the one that we all talk about, right? Alcohol, drugs. But just ask yourself, there are some of us that are drugged up by even religious ideologies, which could be fanatical, right? And which are considered fine. And I'm saying about extreme ideologies that are out there, we know they are. So we should be on the alert to say, where are we being hijacked by this dopiness?
I agree. How many times do we hear, and believe me, I believe that their religious beliefs are worthy and obviously are really helpful in a lot of different ways. But how do we, when somebody is challenged about something horrible that's happening either to them or it's God's plan? I don't question God's plan. That's another way of just going, no,
Yeah.
right? There, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that God's plan, that's what Jung called fate. So you think that you've got everything under control and then fate intervenes. But there's two ways to look at that. You can say, oh, that's meant to be. I'm not going to examine it, because sometimes we create our own fate and our own misery. Or we can say, okay, what is this really speaking to me? What is this really about? I think what Hollis invites you to do, Jung invited, and people that we're talking about invite us to do, is to really take a hard look. For example, this is a clear example often used in these circles. Why do some people keep attracting the same alcoholic type to their lives, for example? Why is that pattern there? And you could say they had a parent who was, but it is not working. The probably more realistic thing is you're not working out that part of yourself. You're allowing someone to live it. Equally, anger, you allow others to live so you can remain pristine and not actually act out that maybe you're really full of rage. We've all met those people, right? And so there are parts of ourselves, parts that belong to the human condition that we've ostracized. We said, no, this is terrible. Anger is terrible. Anger sometimes is the driver to good boundary laying. But there's so many ways, right? So many things. And sometimes, because we're all part of family dynamics, sometimes you also hold back your own golden part, the part that is doing well because you don't want to make someone else feel uncomfortable in a friend group. You make sure that you don't talk about anything that you might have achieved. There's so many ways we play this game just to be able to, and partially in some cases, I think it's an inability to live truth, your truth, right? Because it is scary and yeah.
It's interesting that you just made a phrase just went through my head as you were talking about that in terms of modulating or modifying what you are sharing with a friend group or a family. But this sense that it is natural to want to fit in, Bea.
Yeah, of course.
It is. I get what you as wonderful as these discussions are between you and me and all of your guests. There's not a lot of no, Bea, you're wrong. No, I'm sorry. No, let me contest that. There's a no, Jeff. Actually, what I do it's a natural for us to want to nod our heads and go, I fit in with this group, right? And so I think there needs to be compassion around the fact that sometimes if I was to say what's going through my mind or to attest to something that is controversial, I fear rejection. I fear, and perhaps that, oh my gosh, this is another whole podcast, but that's why the anonymity of the internet.
For sure.
I can express my id. I can express all these feelings that I can't say to my friends because they'll go, oh, but I can express them anonymously. And now we have this mess of everyone expressing these, and it's off the charts. But it's just interesting, that whole idea about how important it is to feel like you are part of something, be it a social group, be it a friend group, family. What does it mean to fit in?
Okay, so I think you can be part of that. So to your point about social media, because obviously I'm on it a lot and I see it, I don't think those people are expressing the same thing that I may be speaking about, in the sense that they're expressing rage about what they feel, about things they feel they can't express. If you could talk to people, and it's not where one of the things, I could have someone who's rageful talk to me, Jeff, we wouldn't get anywhere. I've seen these dialogues happen all the time. The person has to arrive already at a place. I think dialogue is very important, but I think there's also limits to what you can achieve. And I will always, yes, have the conversation, but to some people, they're just too lost in that rage to be able to have it. You're not here to have a conversation. You're here to prove me wrong. I'm not interested because we're not having a real discussion. So there are situations where you must be compassionate because the person really is in pain. But I think fitting in doesn't mean agreeing with a parent who is an extreme fascist, for example, because, hey, we're educating each other and I wouldn't put up with it. It's like, no, we're going to have this conversation and I'm going to oppose you. And maybe you'll get to the point where you have to break with that parent. That happens, right? This is happening a lot lately down south. It's happening, sadly, to many families. And so, yeah, I have to have some real conversations, but you also have to understand the limits. I have a personal story of a friend who had a very bad falling out with a brother, and then the mother died. And she realized that I could continue, because he behaved abominably, I could continue being in this state, or I can get to the point where I accept that this happened and try to have some sort of relationship which is on now with proper boundaries, which cannot be broken. So there are times where you also have to assess the situation individually. This is where it's a case-by-case basis. And so, yes, compassion, but not idiot compassion. That's not good compassion, because it often means you're giving up a part of yourself that may make you feel unsafe, which isn't good. One of the things I'm finding about the world, and maybe it's age or whatever, just seeing it, everything is the way it's presented, whether it's social media, actually a lot of the films and whatever, it's very black and white. And when you get into the stuff of life, things rarely are like that. You have to hold a lot of complexity, a lot of ambiguity in your mind to be able to deal with stuff that on the surface seems, this is a position I'm going to take. It is so clear cut. What some are clear cut. When you damage somebody, look, that's clear cut. Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned it to you a couple of weeks ago when we were having dinner.
Yeah.
And again, I need to remind myself of this all the time as well, because there is a tendency, because I have a big mouth and I like to talk and I'm loud, as I get older, to communicate a certain entrenchment in my opinions. No, this is the way it is. And that gets fueled also, obviously, by the internet and by just being on the sites that sort of confirm or reinforce my own biases and all that stuff. Yeah. But what I want more of, Bea, is people going in these discussions, oh, I've never thought of it that way, Bea.
Yeah.
Actually, that's interesting. It doesn't necessarily change my mind, but that's actually an interesting point, and I haven't thought of it that way before. I don't hear a lot of that happening.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
totally right. But that's where we are so wedded to our beliefs. They're part of our egoic identity. And so this is why when people recognize, and this is happening also right now, that someone has misbehaved awfully, other people could see it, but then you arrive at the understanding that, oh my God, this person is really awful. They still cannot agree to it because it means that everything I've based my identity on has been a lie. And this actually, we get to the fundamental problem of why the individuation process is difficult, because you have to reject parts of yourself, and not reject, but address the parts of yourself that held you back or held you in a certain confined thinking space that has maybe hurt people. And so the first thing is to be humble about it, to say, yeah, that happened. And then I would like to see more grace offered to people who arrive there, because I see this often, that people will say, man, I can't believe I've been thinking this way for the last 5 years. And people just pile on. You were an idiot. How did you? How about what is moment? I get emotional about people coming to the foreground and saying, here I am. I've just realized I made an incredible error that has hurt people, and I would like to make amends. I would like to now think of the world in a different way. That takes so much courage. And I see them being shot down. I think, what a stupid way to approach this, and how unkind. And also, if that's what you're doing, you're driving people into these spaces where they feel afraid. So the first thing is, we all make mistakes. We all ascribe to things that are terrible sometimes through unconscious.
This is what I find fascinating about social media, and why I made a choice, and this was my choice 15 years ago, to get off of it completely. And I'll tell you why, and it's personal to me.
Okay.
Because I'll say this again, I have a big mouth, and I like to expound on stuff, sometimes on stuff that I don't really know a lot about, but I have an idea,
Yes,
right?
that'll-
So I could cite to you
Yeah.
right now at least 5 instances in the last 20 years where I have been in a discussion, a debate, a heated exchange with somebody where I started talking about something that I really didn't know a lot about, but I had a feeling that this was the right way. And I have a loud voice, and I can overshout you in a bar and stuff.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
Yeah. Yes,
Bea,
that's the problem.
I have been wrong a lot of
Yeah.
times. Really wrong,
Yeah.
really wrong about stuff that I was certain that I knew about. Now, here's my issue. In the world of social media, those aren't just arguments that I've thrown across a bar. Those are words I've written down 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And sure enough, what do we see now is over and over again, people being confronted with
What they wrote.
look what you said on Twitter in
Yeah.
2009. Is that
And-
really what you feel about homosexuals?
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
No,
That
that's not
person-
what I feel anymore. That's not what I feel. You know what? Here it is. I'm telling you, Bea, I would be over by now if all of this, some of this dumb stuff that I believed, I had written down 10, 15 years ago.
So this
That's
is
my rant.
Yeah, no, and it's a good rant, and it goes back to giving people grace. People do change. We don't even let our friends change. They can't develop some sort of different awareness. They can't develop different views on it. So now
Well,
imagine,
hold on, Bea. I have a post that you put on Twitter 8 years ago,
8 years ago.
and you said this, and
Yeah.
you seemed really certain because you're very articulate and you can write. So you seem so.
Yeah.
Here's written down.
Yeah.
So
While we're doing that, we're castigating everybody for the versions of themselves that were 20 or 25 or whatever, or weren't even at a point, or might have been 80, but had not reached a level or an understanding. And that's what makes me sad about the whole thing. Now, I will argue that, and I've argued this in many places, you can use social media by, instead of doing that, put out wise words, which is not my words, but that's why I quote who I quote, because I think there are a lot of people who have a lot of wisdom, and I want people to read books that maybe might help them and maybe ask different questions. But yeah, the whole thing is a toxic wasteland that could be used to bring people together. That was the original intent. I don't think that was original, but once you monetize anything, it all goes to hell, which is why I'll never monetize anything, because you start going for audience capture, which is a very dangerous game. And I'm never going to have different conversations because these are the only ones I want to have. But yeah, I can see how people get trapped in it. But yeah, it's the lack of forgiveness that's out there. It's almost like you are one version. If you change, I'm not going to believe you because you're always this person. And yeah, here's where we are at. We're at a very dangerous point, I think, in terms of it. However, I'm going to be the optimist here. I do see that there's a way out. There's a way out through what happened. Look, you are a great representation. You battled an addiction, which is one of the hardest things you did, and you came out the other side, and now you're guiding others. That is the path that we all want to see, right? Not everybody gets stuck or mired in a way of thinking, whatever it is that has got you there. You can get out. And wouldn't it be horrible if I now started? I assume that maybe when you were in that phase, you might have done things you're not proud of. Wouldn't it be horrible if I keep reminding you of that? Now that you're on the other side years later, I decide that the only Jeff that I want to talk to is that Jeff. And that's actually what happens often in families. This is toxic as all hell, right? Person has a dip, and that's all they ever referred to. That's, you're the failure, you're the one that did that. And that is so heartbreaking. It's terrible.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I agree. And I am very lucky in my life that I am surrounded by people who are supportive of me and my journey, although I don't love that word, but also everybody I know has been through stuff.
Yeah, they've been exactly
like there is nobody at this point who's like who hasn't struggled and is struggling now, or was struggling last year, or has it's you get to a certain point, you go, oh, that's why I keep going back to that Marilynne Robinson. Oh, we're all here, we're all there, right? And I'll tell you, if it was to end tomorrow, and I don't want it to end tomorrow, but if it was to end tomorrow, this was incredible, Bea.
Yes, that's it. That's the way I look at it.
This was incredible. The whole thing was incredible.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I do now, more than ever, believe that my humanity was a privilege. I got to do this. But if it was to end tomorrow, holy moly, this was incredible. What an amazing world this was that I got to grow up in. Like, it was incredible. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, that's the way I feel. We're gonna end this with a quote from James Hollis, of course, and the book that I told you to read years ago, Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life, which is a book I often tell people to start with, only because he brings together a lot of the material that was in his previous books, which I really am a fan of, the inner city books that he started publishing. But this is a very good book, and this is what will maybe cap this off. The task for each of us will be found in an increasing capacity to bear our lives without diversion and to suffer the soul's distress until we are led where it wishes to take us. Without more conscious suffering, we can never find depth or meaning, never really grow, and never really change our lives. I think that and the Marilynne Robinson probably tie up what we're talking about. And yeah, it's not easy, but yeah, what a great ride. If you're willing to get out, yeah. That's
remarkable. And a part of it is these conversations with you. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you too for jumping on and for your incredible insights.
My ego would also like to assert that I may be your only podcast guest who actually sang on the podcast. So I just want to
this is saying you're the only one that can sing, okay? But as far as I know, I certainly would never attempt it, my dear. So there you are. Okay, until next time, because we will definitely have more conversations.
Yeah. Thanks, Bea.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to know more about the Sophia Psycho projects or the work I do, please go to sophiapsychos.com. Until next time.